Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this webinar presentation on the 5 Final Mile TMS value pillars presented by PeerBridge and Senflix, how the new Final Mile TMS platforms help you conquer complexity and control costs, capacity, carbon, and customer delivery experiences. One quick note before we get started, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Now, final mile delivery volumes are continuing to rise, with parcel shipments expected to double by 2026. Meanwhile, carriers are struggling with constrained capacity, driver shortages, and higher fuel costs. And consumers are demanding a wider variety of free delivery choices like same day and over the threshold, and at the same time, more sustainable deliveries. Online sellers that fail to respond to these trends will lose customer brand loyalty and be unable to compete in the surging B2C e-commerce market. So today, we'll be hearing about some real-world examples of final mile strategies that can deliver better control, lower per shipment costs, overcome carrier capacity constraints, make shipping sustainable, and improve the customer delivery experience. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Mark Piccirillo is Managing Director at PeerBridge WiseTech Global US. He joined the company in 2004 as Chief Operating Officer, responsible for product and operations. He now leads the expansion of delivery services and integration to WiseTech's CargoWise platform. Bob Malley is Chief Executive Officer at Senflex Technology, a spinoff of PeerBridge and strategic development partner of WiseTech Global. Bob founded Tracer Inc. in 1991 and launched ClipperShip, the first integrated parcel shipping system. He also founded PeerBridge, where he led the development of TransStream, the first cloud-based enterprise parcel shipping platform. So let's get started. I want to begin by posing a question to Bob Malley. You guys have worked together for a while now. What have you seen as some of the major turning points in the parcel management technology market?
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, we've worked together for over 30 years building parcel shipping system software, as you said, at Tracer and then at PeerBridge. And but now we're leading separate companies, but we're still working together on solving some of the new challenges that are arising. And by the way, you'll hear me refer to Mark Piccirillo as Pick, which is his nickname in the industry. I didn't even know his name was Mark until today. But yeah, so the multi-carrier parcel shipping industry has always been propelled by innovations in response to critical issues arising in the market. But most have been around execution, establishing a single platform to normalize notoriously proprietary and non-standard parcel shipping rates, labels, data structures, and while at the same time automating shipment processing in DCs and warehouses at very high speeds. So, but over the last few years, with, as you say, the dramatic acceleration of B2C e-commerce growth, especially with the onset of COVID, has really transformed the industry and created what I see as the major turning point, marked by complexity, with the demand for more carrier diversity, omnichannel fulfillment, and obviously capacity issues. So I would say B2C shipping complexity is a turning point, and it's really requiring innovations to address some of the new challenges that shippers are facing today. So I'll kick it over to Pick. What are you seeing?
Thanks, Bob. It has been a long time, a lot of changes since we started for sure. And I'd say, while complexity has always been part of what multi-carrier parcel systems have tried to solve, but at the beginning, it was all about getting a label out for least cost, right? So it was order by order and execution. Now complexity is multiplied exponentially with not just the major carriers and the move to regionals that happened, when we started PeerBridge, but now you have final mile carriers, same day carriers, and couriers in local markets that need to be considered, as well as crowdsourced options. So with all of these additional carrier options, now more than ever, the decision-making process for choosing, which carrier is the right option is exponentially more complex. And traditional multi-carrier parcel systems on their own aren't enough. So let's look at some of the other challenges in more detail. So, we've all heard about the continued growth of smaller and more frequent shipments. And looking at the chart to the left, which supports it, you'll see that really all but the US Postal Service has continued to grow. And we can talk about another time at the Postal Service or on another call, but retailers and manufacturers and distribution companies are all having to diversify their carrier mix, which is, when you look at the other there on that chart, is continuing to increase. So sure, it's still, a smaller bar than the others, but it's increasing by a lot faster rate than the others have. And as I said, shippers can no longer just use one or two carriers. They're now working with non-traditional options for delivery, including things like lockers, crowdsourced delivery services, and other same-day or local carriers, and attempting to do it from many origin shipping points, some of which weren't really designed for order fulfillment centers, right? There's retail stores and such. So complexity in the supply chain, go to the next slide, Scott, is here to stay. And many really don't have the systems to handle it. They're stuck trying to make traditional parcel or multi-carrier management systems work in a way that they were not initially designed to, or at least not at the scale of having many shipping origins and that many carrier options available. So yes, multi-carrier parcel systems are still applicable, but with the increased customer expectations around delivery options, rising costs, which continue to go up for transportation, carrier capacity, which we'll talk about, and Bob Bowman mentioned, carriers trying to limit that capacity, increased costs, all these things, including now, sustainability options, and consumers who care about and are more environmentally conscious, are all adding outside business considerations that just aren't part of the traditional systems. All these new challenges require a new solution in order for companies to effectively compete.
Yeah, so what we're hearing from shippers is that they need a way, I guess, an easier way to control the complexity that has really crept in incrementally into the B2C parcel market. And really, what we really notice is they need the same kind of order optimization, mode shifting, and modeling capabilities that has historically been the remit of freight TMS B2B systems, but they need it. They need it at the parcel shipping system velocities and the fast cycles that parcel requires. So this matrix, which I won't read out bit by bit, but it highlights the differences between freight TMS, the traditional freight TMS, and the traditional parcel shipping system worlds. So what Final Mile TMS platforms strive to do is to combine the configurability, the no-code configurability of planning optimization with mode shifting, parcel to LTL, and simulation modeling in a way that accommodates the faster cycle times, high volumes and transaction speeds required by parcel and final mile B2C shipments. So you think of freight volumes, a large freight shipper might do over 100 a day. A large parcel shipper could do tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. So they're really different. Kinds of solutions. So by doing so, we'll address a number of critical issues facing shippers today, providing significant value, which we will cover today, that face distribution chain managers.
So how is Peerbridge working with Senflex to combine TMS optimization with parcel shipping speeds?
That's a good question. So we're already using Senflex optimization technology along with our TransStream enterprise shipping platform to really create a complete final mile TMS. So putting the planning and decision making in front of and driving the execution. And together we deliver the 5 value pillars of value.
Okay, well, let's look at those 5 pillars. And I'll summarize. We'll go into each one in a little bit more detail in terms of how they're addressed. But I think the big one here is control. Like Freight TMS, Final Mile TMS systems focus on reducing the complexity of carrier onboarding, business rules, workflows that are associated with managing a more diverse network of carriers. The way that the freight systems have had to over the many years, because they had to manage thousands of carriers, where really how much planning would it take to hand your parcels off to UPS and FedEx? So they do so, the freight TMS systems, without expensive programming and the long project timelines that legacy shipping systems users have had to struggle with. So no code configurability effectively shifts the control from IT and data scientists and field engineers to logistics managers, who can then adapt to of the very increasingly dynamic B2C environment. So with these tools, managers can, on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, change routing rules, fulfillment rules, packing rules, in a way that gives them agility in the market, and run simulation models to test their assumptions about what might be best in terms of planning and future considerations. Secondly is cost. Maybe some would say first, but you may not get to cost unless you have more control. So obviously carrier rates and fuel surcharges continue on the rise, but also on unexpected surcharges, DIM fees, corrugated material, which is going up in prices because of supply chain blockages, labor shortages all impact costs. So those are the kinds of other costs that Final Mile TMS business rules can support by automating cost-effective business decisions throughout the fulfillment process. So capacity, this is another big one. E-commerce package volumes are going through the roof and expected to double within the next 5 years, as Bob said. And major carriers, even Amazon, is struggling to keep up. So in fact, the new UPS CEO said, bigger, better, not bigger, which was a signal to the market. We're not going to really be able to grow at the same pace as the volume. So you better recognize that. So, driver shortages are also impacting capacity. And while post-COVID capacity may ease up a bit, there's still the fluctuations, the seasonal fluctuations, create an uncertainty in the market that shippers really need to address. So Final Mile TMS platforms not only add capacity by adding more carrier diversification, but they also optimize cube utilization so that you're taking most advantage of existing capacity. Carbon sustainability is a concern both in the boardroom and living rooms. For those of all of us who have received packages that are filled with air, you know what I mean. So, freight Final Mile TMS platforms use cartonization and containerization algorithms to minimize that waste, take air out of cartons, and optimize carrier services based on sustainability. And finally, but not least, the customer experience. Customers expect shippers to make and keep their delivery promises. And that requires a level of control over decision making at all points in the fulfillment process. So let's look at more closely at how Final Mile TMS capabilities can impact these 5 critical issues.
Sure, thanks, Bob. So let's face it, one of the factors of implementing any system within an organization, right, whether it's a transportation manager or WMS or anything, is all about providing a level of control. But traditional systems required either specialized training or expertise, or worse, IT level resources to make changes. So companies resisted. New Final Mile TMS systems need to be about putting the power of that decision making into the hands of logistics professionals. And to do that requires tools that are more configuration, right? Choosing or adding instructions more so than scripting or development, right? Which require those specialized resources. As we mentioned earlier, the explosion of carriers requires faster connectivity options for onboarding carriers, and the ability to do that for logistics professionals to look at historical data when doing that, right? What if I added this carrier in? And apply those new options and instructions or rules that can impact transportation decisions.
Okay, sounds great, but give me an example of a business rule that a logistics manager might want to control.
So we'll go back to one of the ones Bob brought up about carrier capacity. It's front of mind for a lot, especially larger shippers. And how to route based on now not just looking at contracts and making sure you maximize and hit your thresholds for getting the contract, but now there's an upper limit at which point you start paying more. So how do you do that? And where logistics managers previously were guessing or trying to manage it without all the tools, and they shipped enough to get their discounts and didn't have to worry about the upper cap. Well, now they have to. So it's even more important to plan to make sure that they don't ship too much. They ship enough to get and hit their incentives, but not too much where they start to lose those incentives and pay back the carrier for everything they've done with increased costs for shipments, beyond that expected capacity. So that's just one example of managing the capacity. That's a good rule. And, there are many types of rules that may need to be applied. So needing to consider all of these challenges and make better decisions could easily wind up increasing costs. So that is why cost is the second pillar. And automation is really key here. Whether it's, Final Mile TMS systems need to be able to consider all the potential costs to provide accurate information to be used when making carrier selection decisions or feedback from execution. It's not being able to, consider all those areas, like I said, could mean the difference between making or losing money on transportation costs, never mind as a company with some of the thin margins a lot of our customers are working with. And let's not forget, again, the potential penalties introduced around dimensional weighing, which, we put under carbon and sustainability, and customers are more conscious of it. How many times now have we seen online with social media, a customer posting a picture of a carton with one thing in it, and the carton has all this air. So ensuring that you're effectively packing orders in the correct cartons or in the correct sequence on pallets is critical to avoiding damages or unexpected charges that you only find out about after the fact. So with all that planning, making sure you're doing that. And I briefly mentioned, maximizing carrier discounts when talking about an earlier slide and earlier here. Contract compliance, being able to monitor where you are and shift if needed can be key also to determining, whether or not companies are profitable. So let's look at the next pillar about capacity.
Yeah, thanks, Pick. Yeah, there are a number of ways Final Mile TMS systems can help build capacity, and we've already talked about one of them, and that is building carrier network diversification using a no-code approach to eliminate long programming projects and so forth. But there are others like omnichannel fulfillment. To compete with Amazon, e-commerce shippers are going to have to figure out ways to ship from inventory locations closer to their customers, both to reduce costs, shipping costs, with faster delivery times, and thereby taking advantage of more capacity in the form of regional carriers and local carriers and group sourced carrier services. So Final Mile TMS platforms can help automate fulfillment location decisions based on those factors. So if you have 10 different fulfillment centers, or you're trying to ship from stores, what's the best store to ship from? Or what's the best fulfillment store to ship from, taking those carrier rates and transit times and inventory availability into account? Well, you've got to look across orders and consider what other orders might be coming due to fulfillment. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, how significant are the new carrier service entries into the market? Local couriers, gig economy carrier networks, and the like.
Well, I would say they're very significant, and if nothing else, they help fill in gaps when the major carriers are struggling themselves with capacity. But I would also say is freight management solution is like adding these local carrier services as an adjunct to major parcel carriers. I think of the major parcel carriers as sort of being the entree, with the local carrier services being more of the appetizers. They're filling in and they're rounding out the meal. That makes sense. So if you think of it, I think someone said that a regional carrier might ship as much in a year as a major carrier ships in a week. So there's a question of scale there that needs to be realistically addressed. So if we look at consolidated drop shipping, there are thousands of LTL and full truckload carriers that can also be used to fill in gaps, but that gap is making that line haul to final mile distribution points, which is good for the carrier. It's good for the shipper because it's a lower cost per pound, and it takes advantage of the carriers, local carriers, or the national carriers that can pick it up from there. I mean, they love consolidated loads hitting their dock. Optimized cube utilization. So we talked about cartonization and algorithms being able to take the air out of cartons and build pallets in a way that makes the best use of available capacity. One carrier executive said that about 16% of their capacity is wasted hauling around air. And it's just having a dramatic impact when packing isn't optimized. I recently ordered a phone. I won't say what kind of phone, and they said, "Well, they're giving me a trade-in on my old phone." So I said, "Okay," and they would arrange for it. And so about a week later, I got an empty box to put the phone in. It dropped off on my doorstep, and I thought, "There's nothing in this box. It's a pretty wasteful use of capacity." And then there's alternate pickup locations. So, freight final mile TMS solutions can look at orders, and they can look at customer preferences in terms of what routing logic should be used to offer alternate pickup solutions like BOPIS. FedEx has a hold at location service. UPS has their access program. There are more, Pitney Bowes is rolling out lockers. These are all, I think, very good ways of expanding capacity. So optimizing capacity and density is also closely related, as was said, with sustainability. So if you look at, again, optimizing the cube, someone at Hewlett Packard, the head of sustainability for Hewlett Packard, made a very good comment. She said, "Wasting carbon is wasting money, and wasting money is a symptom of bad management." So from the obvious sustainability benefits, if you can give a logistic manager the tools they need to optimize cube utilization, you can save money. You can help them save money, which is really their job. So this is sustainability isn't just a high, falutin notion. It's also becoming an important part of procurement. So if you're a shipper, shippers are increasingly coming under the inspection of their customers, their B2C customers, to make sure that they're implementing sustainability programs. So with Final Mile TMS, with cartonization, palletization instructions automated, shippers can begin to implement sustainability programs that really help control their carbon footprint. Minimize dunnage and corrugated. We talked about the cost of corrugated going up. I recently got an empty box, as I said, and you have to haul all that stuff off, and it's wasted trees. It's just not good for the environment. So as well as costing too much, having to buy more corrugated than you actually need. And then greener delivery alternatives. There's some new alternative services where they're filling the belly of planes with parcels for sort of a kind of like a line haul, but a drop ship solution. And that's a very that's a greener alternative than sending one parcel at a time. So all of these factors really point to a more positive customers sustainability experience as well.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks, Bob. Yeah. And we'll look at that as the fifth pillar here is about, customer expectations and the delivery experience that your company provides. And your brand is directly impacted by, the transportation decisions that you're making every day, or that people in your fulfillment centers are making every day. And, when we look at what are some of those changing expectations and, some numbers. So the last few years, we've seen the explosion in online shopping, whether it's B2C or B2B, frankly. And thanks to Leasely partnering to Amazon, 60% of those consumers want their items delivered within 3 hours of making an online purchase. So again, huge numbers changing in the last 2+ years, through COVID and everything, and continuing to grow. And there's still a large number, like 62% or so, who consider shipping costs above all other factors, driving about 73% of customers to decide not to make a purchase due to delivery cost. So it used to be enough just to let a customer know when the order would arrive and giving them a good cost. And while not perfect, the major carriers do a pretty good job of meeting those expectations. But consumers today care a lot more about just when an order will arrive. And while it is still important, environmentally conscious consumers may choose to wait and have and aggregate multiple orders to reduce carbon, reduce carton, extra air in cartons in a single delivery, or won't order again if and when they receive like Bob did, an empty box, or one that's inefficiently packed. So we've all received those orders where the container is packed in a way where it's too large for that item. And well, like it or not, that has an impact and drives the consumer's perception of the brand. So customer experience is increasingly important. And again, not just what they see online, but what happens after they order. So how do you deal with all these expectations, all while bringing in new carriers and new delivery options? So let's look at how Final Mile TMS platforms optimize or run what-if simulations against the 5 C's.
Yeah, and by the way, those were the 5 C's, the 5 value pillars.
Yep.
We have an ebook that's available that we'll be giving you directions at the end of the session, where you can look at it in more detail. So we hope you can download the ebook. So let's look at how it works, how optimization, order optimization, and running simulations can help you improve on those 5 pillars. So I like to look at it in the same way that developers need sandboxes to test their programs. For those of you who have any familiarity with your IT department, there are sandboxes where they run programs and they look for problems that they didn't, bugs that they didn't really anticipate. In that same way, logistics managers should have what I'm going to call a playpen. an area where they can test the cost, capacity, and delivery impact based on their assumptions, based on their business rules and instructions. It doesn't exist in legacy shipping systems, which are only able to look at one order at a time. So here we see a Final Mile TMS, what we call a workbench, which enables logistics managers to gather order data into a single view where they can be filtered and business rules applied to create one or more fulfillment plans and the ability to manage the impact of those, or to compare the impact of those fulfillment plans. So order data can come from e-commerce platforms, marketplaces, order management systems, WMS systems, of course. But traditionally, multi-carrier shipping systems, again, look at one order at a time, whereas Final Mile TMS systems look across a broad sweep of orders. Or you could pull in shipping history, either executed on the same platform, the TMS, the Final Mile TMS platform, or import shipping data from another shipping system or an auditor to determine, to run what if scenarios. What if I had used a regional carrier during last November's peak period? What would the cost have been? What would the cost difference have been? And what would the delivery time impacts have been based on their own delivery transit time schedules? You run the simulations and you find out. You look at the impact. Or another system like we had talked about, ERP, OMS, and WMS systems can post orders or shipping history data to the Final Mile TMS API and use the results to optimize and supplement their own processes. So this idea of gathering orders and running optimization scenarios. So once it's assembled, once the data is assembled in a place where it can be viewed, being able to measure impact of the optimization and simulation results is what the exercise is all about. So in this case, as you see here, you could select one or more locations, fulfillment locations, or configure instructions to determine the best location to fulfill from based on cost, inventory availability, and transit times. Then in a separate section there, you can select and you can rank carrier services you may want to consider. And there could be lots of them. You then select container sizes so that you're making sure that you're optimizing cube and determining what the best mix of carton types is. You can also select among, as we talked about, the no code instructions, and there are lots of instructions that you could apply, but you can pick and choose the ones that you want to apply based on the fulfillment constraints that you want to determine. There are lots of instructions, some of which we've talked about. The major carrier pickup caps that are in vogue these days, or at least during peak periods. Carrier incentives. I want to know what my run rate is in order to make sure I don't lose my incentives. I want to mix the carrier diversification, but I don't want to lose that primary carrier incentive. So I've heard from regional carriers saying we can't get traction within a customer because we're afraid of losing those incentives. Well, now they don't need to be concerned with it because the system will keep track of that. Cartonization, consolidation, transit time. In the screenshot that follows, we'll show a comparison in the change in transit time from 4 days max to 2 days max, and show you what a logistics manager can see.
Well, that's a great benefit, great results there. But I'm wondering if you could just tell me a little bit more about the concept of carrier ranking.
Yeah, well, in the old days, selecting carrier services was all about simple rate shopping. And really that was I would say more like a marketing pitch among um, multi-carrier shipping software companies, because shippers tended to have the major one of the major carriers. So really, how much shopping do you really need to do? What kind of service you want pretty easily. But as we've discussed, as carrier service selections are now a lot more complex, cost is just one aspect that we've talked about of the optimization process, which can now include pickup limits, incentives, capacity, transit time. Performance is a big one. To a certain zip code, how does this carrier do? Well, they don't do well, so we're going to re-rank them. Shipment attributes. Does this carrier support hazardous material? How are they doing on fragility? So each of these carries what I'd call a value coefficient, which optimization processes use to rank the relative rank of carrier services. So one carrier, again, may be more expensive, but their delivery performance might not be so great for a certain zip code. So you re-rank them, and maybe the more expensive carrier wins in that situation. So if we go to if we look at the optimization process, applies instructions, taking into account the considerations we discussed. I'd emphasize, though, that at this point that a key consideration is, in terms of simulations, is having what I'll call a hyperfast onboard rating capability, a rating engine to keep up with the performance required when you're doing lots of rating iterations. When you're doing shipping, you just get a rate. You already know how you're going to ship it. When you're doing planning and simulations, you're looking at a lot of different potential alternatives. So using carrier APIs for that purpose is probably not a good idea, because they're too slow and unreliable. So having an onboard rating where you could do hundreds of rates a second is key to this whole process. So you can see that the results of running and comparing two plans, the plan on the right is based on a 4-day maximum transit time and is less expensive than the plan on the left. Has a marginally better delivery, but it's also more expensive. So if these were run as simulations against historical data, then logistics managers could reconfigure instructions or improve the instructions so that they get a better result in the future. So at this point, logistics managers can release the plan for shipping to execute, or results can be fed back via the API to the host system for further considerations. So as you can see, optimization can have a dramatic effect. This is how it has a dramatic effect on the 5 pillars we've talked about.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so we just looked at all the planning, which is an important piece to, making sure you're setting good objectives for what you're trying to do and meeting, all those 5 pillars. But, the last piece of that is execution. If you do all that planning, right, and we provide all that planning to help logistics managers to consider all options, but don't execute well, then all the planning in the world is of little use if it isn't executed, right? And moving from planning to executing on that plan is critical. Just as important as having the connection between those systems to ensure that you can measure how you're doing on the plan. So here's what I planned. Here's the result. We executed the shipment. Did we execute it correctly? And feeding that information back. And say, look, if we did, great. If not, why not? What's the impact? Because when reality hits in the, in your warehouse or fulfillment center, there may be good reasons why it didn't happen. You need to be able to feed that back in so you're making and optimizing your plans even more. So we talked about, running simulations using your data and taking into account historical performance of what actually happened. Are some of these key data points. What happens, as I said, what happens in the real world of your warehouse or fulfillment center is going to have an impact on whether you realize the results of all that planning, both from a cost and customer expectation, carbon, again, all the 5 pillars that we talked about. So being able to then use that information to make better decisions within the context of the 5 pillars is what it's all about. So today we looked at the 5 pillars, and while some of them have been around for a long time, right? Cost has always been something looked at, control to some extent, and they're constantly changing. There are new ones like carbon and sustainability and increase in customer delivery expectations that are all having a greater impact. And all of them are impacting your business and ultimately your customer. And just to summarize those 5 pillars, they're control, cost, capacity, carbon, and ultimately all those impacting the customer experience. And they're all key to the long-term success of your business. So logistics managers and professionals need the ability to consider all these implications, all these rules, all these instructions, to help their organizations make the best decisions and then measure and adjust as necessary.
Great. Thank you very much for that excellent presentation from both of you. A real eye opener, full of insight and valuable information for our audience. At this point, we do have time for some questions from the audience and audience members, even as we answer what the questions that we've already received. You're welcome to continue submitting those questions by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many of them as we can, time permitting. Let me start with this one, though. I'm going to throw it out to whoever wants to answer it. How do you influence operational decisions of large carriers on the platform to follow Sendflex's recommendations? Maybe that's a Bob question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that I've been actually talking to a lot of carrier executives about. And what carriers are saying to me is that they go into boardrooms of their customers and get beaten up on rates. Can you lower your dim factor, or can you just lower your rates in general? And their thought process is, we have the same problem. We're having the same problem of cost and capacity. Is there a way we can work together and take a more granular look at and make data-driven decisions that benefit both of us? So things like consolidating loads that can be presented to a carrier for a drop ship into further up their network, where they can actually optimize their network at the same time a shipper optimizes their order to consolidation process. I think there's just a real there's a platform for discussion with the Final Mile TMS platform.
Thank you. This is just a question from the audience who wants to know how gas prices are affecting shipping right now. What's happening out there in the real world, guys?
Yeah, I think anyone would have to have their head in the sand to not realize that it's having an impact. And I think, you're seeing even now some of these smaller carriers adding things like, fuel surcharges, which the larger major carriers did to account for it, because it's not something that they can plan in all the time to their cost miles. And even if they try to plan it in at the rate it's changing, it's just, it's not possible. So, the easy answer to the question is it's having a huge impact on everything, just the transportation cost, but now also the products that are being transported, because something's got to absorb that cost.
Yeah, I've often wondered, how long will free shipping be a thing?
Yeah.
Well, it was for a while, and then it wasn't, and then now it's back again on the table, supposedly.
That's right.
Welcome to $7 a gallon diesel, or
more than that for some of us who live in even more expensive areas where that's the case. Okay, here's a question I think I want to direct a pick. You talk about final mile carrier services. What carriers are you referring to?
All right, so we kind of put them in buckets. So we have the major carriers, the UPS, FedEx, DHL, and USPS. Then you've got regional carriers like OnTrack, LSO, Speedy, LaserShip. But now you've also got services like Uber Freight, Pitney Bowes eCommerce services, and brokers now that are sitting in between some of these smaller local delivery companies. And add to that, LTL for that middle mile and drop ship. There are just hundreds of carriers and services out there now, which is making data-driven decisions that much more critical.
Okay, thanks for that. Maybe for Bob, in your examples, you illustrate the ability to optimize orders or run what-if simulations against shipping history. Can you also support one order at a time?
Yeah, sure, we can. And we have an API available to do that. But a good example of a one request at a time is certainly determining shipping quotes up in shopping carts or freight quotes and order entry. We've seen examples where shippers have to go down to the warehouse, take cases out of inventory, build the pallets, dimensionalize them, weigh them, and then deconstruct the pallet, put it away, and then they run upstairs to the office to look at LTL sites for rates. The alternative to that is they use rules of thumb or they just guess. So guess it too high, you lose the customer. Guess too low, you could lose margin. So whereas with the Final Mile TMS, you could use a Final Mile TMS API or app to apply instructions and get an accurate freight quote within seconds.
Thank you. We are just about out of time. We have time for just one final audience question, and I'm going to start by posing it to Pick. And the question is, can I use shipping history from the last peak period to run forecasts for the next holiday season?
So great question. And the answer is yes. It's a simulation or modeling and really about changing assumptions about costs and volumes that you would do. And in fact, you'll see we have a complimentary offer to run simulations for the registrants of the webinar. And starting with last year's peak season is a great way to prepare for this year's peak season. And if you want to work with us to see how you can optimize and use final mile fulfillment, we'd be happy to work with you on it. And Bob, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think just in general, we're excited about this next generation of capabilities. So if you're out there and you're wondering, well, let me see the impact of running optimization processes against my orders or against my shipping history, we'd love to talk to you. Apply carrier pickup limits, apply different carton types, see what the impact would be on cost and cube. Adding a regional carrier, what will that have done? What will it have done? What should it have done, and what will it do to cost and delivery performance?
Fantastic. Well, thank you both, Mark Piccarello of PeerBridge, Bob Malley of Senflix, for a fantastic presentation talking about a truly innovative, if not long overdue, extension and application of TMS technology. Here's where you can get more information from our distinguished speakers today. There's their contact info right there in front of you. And so I'm sure they would love for you to reach out. And if indeed there were any audience questions that did not get addressed because of time considerations on this presentation, I'm sure that these gentlemen would be happy to answer them for you offline. In addition, here's a couple of two additional very valuable assets. You can download the 5 Final Mile TMS Value Pillars ebook, and you can request a complimentary final mile data analysis. You'll see URLs underneath of them. Don't bother to rush to copy them down. They will be included in the email version of this presentation that will be sent to all attendees. So thanks again to our great speakers, Mark Piccarello and Bob Malley. Thank you, audience, for your excellent questions as well. Everybody, have a fantastic day.